Hare Krishna. On behalf of the ISKCON Ministry of Education, I'd like to welcome everyone to another interview on the importance of reading Srila Prabhupada's books. And we are very honored that we have today with us His Grace Mahatma Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. Of course, Mahatma Prabhu is very well known in our Hare Krishna movement. He got in touch with Krishna consciousness in 1969, and then in 1970 joined the Berkeley Temple, met Srila Prabhupada, received initiation, and then, of course, served in many different services as a book distributor, as a Sankirtan leader, as a temple president, I believe 4 times. I read on your webpage, is that right?
Yeah, it was the same temple happened twice at 2 different times.
Okay.
And it was, that it was actually 4.5, because one temple I was temple president for 2 weeks ad hoc.
Okay.
While they were waiting to get another temple president, and I said, I was a book distributor, and I said, 2 weeks, when 2 weeks is up, I'm leaving. You have to get another temple president. So I was actually temple president of Laguna Beach for 2 weeks. So you could say 4.5.
4.5 times. So, plenty of experience. Plenty of experience in management. And then also, of course, in different preaching activities, college preaching, also in educational projects, in the VIHE as a teacher, and I think also co-director. And of course, you're also known for your music. I personally remember how at the Govinda restaurants here in Zurich, was always this Brahma Samhita prayers was in the background. Nowadays, I think you're focusing more on teaching. And since 2013, you're also serving as an initiating spiritual master and helping devotees and people in general to apply the spiritual wisdom, the spiritual knowledge that we receive from Prabhupada's books. So I'm very grateful to have you.
I will be focusing more on music in the future. So it's so deeply ingrained in me. I've just been extremely busy with other things, but you will hear more.
Music still plays an important role in your life. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
That's great. Maybe we can start, if you'd like to share a little bit with us how you met the devotees in 1960.
Well, actually, I think I met them, it must have been 1967 when I first saw them. Or even, 68. I'm from Los Angeles, so I'd have to figure out when the devotees were there. Probably it was 1968. And I was still in high school. And so the Harinam party was going out to places where all of us young people would go. So I was impressed. I met a devotee. I was very impressed. I was actually so impressed by this devotee that I never forgot him because he was so sincere. And I used to think, I never met anybody that sincere. So then I was I guess before that, I went to Haight-Ashbury in 1967, and I saw someone walking around with a shaved head and Sika. I thought, okay, that's unusual. Then I heard the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra on the radio. It was from the play Hare. And then I went to school in Berkeley, and by Krishna's arrangement, devotees were doing Harinam Sankirtan 6 days a week, I believe, at the entrance, either on the street that enters university or at the university. So I was pretty much surrounded by the holy name. And the home I grew up in for the first 19 years of my life was by car, probably 4-minute drive to the temple.
Oh,
it's closer than where I live now. Because now if I go to the temple, it would take an hour to walk there. And I actually went back a few years ago and walked it. It takes about 20 minutes from where I lived to walk to the old temple. So I was pretty much surrounded by devotees.
And do you remember the first book that you received and read?
I didn't receive it. I actually I went in a bookstore and I saw Bhagavad Gita. I didn't know what it was. And I didn't have any money, so I couldn't buy it, but it wasn't Prabhupada's Gita. But when I picked it up, Super Soul said, I can remember very strongly, read this book. And I wasn't into reading books. I was more into sports. I was into philosophy, more talking, but I was very active with my body. I was into music and not so much sitting around reading. And so when I went to campus to register, Bhakta Howard, who was later to become Hridayananda Maharaj, was sitting by a card table with a little sign on it said Bhagavad Gita, 4 units, which meant there was a Bhagavad Gita class. So I was thinking, that's the book I saw in the bookstore. Here's a class. So it was like, okay, that voice, whatever that voice was, now we know it was Super Soul. I was following that voice, like, my intuition, I thought. So I'm supposed to read this book and they're giving a class. Okay. And, it's considered a philosophy class. I need to take a philosophy class. So I kind of got the book because I signed up for the class. It was class text. So nobody came to me with the book. In those days, there were only a few hundred devotees in the whole world. And somehow or other, no devotee ever approached me. But one of them, it's so amazing the way Krishna got me, because my roommate was a friend. Actually, all my roommates were class friends, so the same neighborhood as Hridayananda Maharaj. I'm from that same neighborhood. So they all knew him personally. They were all his age, like maybe a year older than me. And one of them was very interested in Krishna consciousness, and he would meet Howard. Oh, I met Howard today. He'd be in the house telling, I met Howard today, and we had this discussion, and he'd be telling everybody the discussions he had. So I'm hearing Krishna consciousness from my roommate, and he had all the magazines. So I would read all the magazines, and we go to the temple together. And he'd say, I can't go here that often. I said, why? He said, because if I do, I'll just move in. So Hridayananda Maharaj was one of the devotees that had a great influence on me. So I got Bhagavad Gita by really learned Bhagavad Gita by attending the class. It was twice a week for an hour and a half. And I attended that class for 10 weeks. And I read the Gita twice. It was the old, smaller version. I read it twice in those 10 weeks.
Wow. So in the very beginning, you got it introduced with devotees explaining everything.
Yeah. And so I wasn't really clear who Prabhupada was. Obviously, I understood he was the author of the book. And I remember specifically that it's not like you have to remember or learn that much. You just have to learn a few things. And they used to say, if you just could understand one verse of the Gita, that's enough. And I always think, there's so many books, we're reading all the time, one verse. But when I look back and I think about it, there were only a few things that I learned, but they were all so powerful that I had to become a devotee. And I remember thinking of them all the time. They said this in class. There's always saying the same things in class because they didn't know much. So I was getting to hear the same things over and over. Just do this to please Krishna. Everything you do should please Krishna. And I'd always think, okay, what am I going to do today? I have to please Krishna. It's a few nuggets. And the main thing I remember from Prabhupada's books, and I'm going back, this is 1969, and I'm remembering it because it was indelibly imprinted in my heart. The thing that kept coming up from what I remember the most from reading Bhagavad Gita twice is that you can only be Krishna conscious through devotional service. You can only understand Krishna through devotional service. So I'm reading this and thinking, only through devotional service, translated in those days to moving in the temple. So there was always this, there was no congregation. There was just, you live in the temple or you die, basically. So I was always thinking, this is always the conclusion that Prabhupada comes to. You have to do devotional service. So it was like weighing on me. This is what I have to come to. So that, those few things, please Krishna, I'm not the body. That was very powerful for me. you'll only get self-realized by devotional services. Like a few things. That was enough. Just those few things, which is interesting, right?
Yeah. Quite amazing. Just a few.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I think a lot of times we forget how potent Prabhupada's books are, because when you're coming from the material world and you don't have this knowledge, those few things, they're so powerful. Like when I heard I wasn't the body, it was like, I went completely crazy. That was like the best thing I've heard. I go, oh, I don't die. Wow, it was the best thing I heard in, the last 10 million lifetimes. Because, I couldn't adapt to the concept of death. It didn't make sense to me. And the idea of never existing and being born into this world for, whatever, 75 years, of just trying to, maintain yourself and find a little happiness on Saturday night. That didn't make sense. So then they say you don't die. And I was like, yeah, that makes so much sense. So like these few little things, and you think, but like, didn't anybody know that? That's like ABCs of spiritual life. The thing is, we didn't know it. Nobody knew that. Nobody was saying it, the way Prabhupada was just saying it. And so although we look back and say, well, that's simple. You're not the body, you're spirit soul. But that had an incredibly powerful effect on me. I walked out of my first lecture hearing that. It's like I was in another world now. I was looking at the world completely differently. Oh, I've lived millions of lifetimes. That's quite a different perception. So I think maybe we take it for granted, like these things in Prabhupada's books they're quite potent. We just, we're used to it. We've heard it a million times. So.
In some way, you already answered a bit my next question in the sense of how Srila Prabhupada's books and like what impact it had in your life. Of course, looking back now, you have been practicing for 50 years.
Right.
What was the impact of Prabhupada's teachings in your life? And
I want to share a story because I think this story will say more about the impact it has on all of us than just me. So I counsel a lot of devotees, and often when a devotee's having a lot of problems, I'm like a doctor, So you wake up with backaches and, you have a pain in your side. And when you take a cold shower, do you get a head? You're looking for symptoms, right? So I go down the list. So how are your rounds? How's your reading? What time do you get up? Do you have any service? You have a mentor, just go down the list. So we're going down the list. How's your reading? And he said, I'm not reading. And he had a laundry list of problems, like big problems and a lot of them. I said, could you read Prabhupada's books every day, at least 1 hour, if not 2? He said, okay. I never heard from him again. Or I heard from him again. He said, my problems are gone. I just wasn't reading Prabhupada's books. So it brought out something which I knew, but it just made it put it in a different context. That when Prabhupada is coming to the West, he's bringing his books. Why? Because he's not going to be able to get us out of Maya just by kirtan, because our chanting is not that pure. He's going to need books, right? And so in inspiring devotees to read Prabhupada's books and getting their feedback, because so many devotees don't read enough. And so I'm always telling devotees, read. They said, I get a report from my disciples every month. They tell me how much they're reading. And if it's like less than an hour, can you read more? Because an hour is like, that's basic nutrients, your minimum daily requirement. So what I'm seeing is when they do it, they all say, things are different. I'm so much stronger. So it's kind of like I see Prabhupada's books like vitamins and minerals. And so if you're not reading, well, you know why you're having problems? You're deficient in your spiritual vitamins and minerals. That's my experience over and over again. So I get this feedback from devotees all the time. And then asking personally, one of the things we used to do as book distributors, we'd have one day off, usually Monday, I think, Sunday or Monday. And so we'd only do 2 things on our day off. One was sleep as much as we possibly could, because we had to catch up, because we only slept like 6 hours. And usually it wasn't like ideally enough for us. We're working all day. And I don't remember ever sleeping extra in those days, except maybe in the van on the way back from the airport, or on the way too, but not like lying down and taking naps. So on the day off, we would, first order of business after breakfast was just go to sleep and just don't get up until you're not tired. And then after we all get up, we'd all go somewhere and we would just read Bhagavatam for like 5 hours. As many hours. It's like, get as many hours of rest you can and read as much as you can, because this is what you're going to need to get you through the next week. So we felt that strongly. That service of book distribution in those days, we were going to airports, and I found airports very grueling, not easy at all. And people are rushed, and you have to, be full of energy to stop them. If you stop them, you've got to close the deal, so to speak, very quickly. You've got to say the right thing. You just got to be on top of your game completely. And so we all knew if we didn't read enough, there was no way we could perform. So that was vital to our book distribution, but it's vital to our spiritual life. So my realization was, I had this realization, but long ago, but it just became more, I say, profound for me, that if you're going to be Krishna conscious and you're not going to be reading Prabhupada's books, that's not the way he intended it. It's like, it's not going to work. There's going to be some vitamin deficiency, and it's going to show up somewhere in your spiritual life. You know how sometimes devotees say, I'm really not that Krishna conscious. I'm still attached to watching movies, and I'm still attached to this, and it's hard to, to get up early, and, all those things that are difficult. And I feel, so you need to read Prabhupada's books sufficiently, because you'll have less of those problems, if at all, any of those problems. So the package Prabhupada gave, the books are a vital part of the package there. You're not going to be able to do it well. It's not that you can't do it, but you're not going to be able to do it well without them. And then you're going to misunderstand things also. You're not going to, if someone's going to say something in class that could be a little off, and you won't even know it. Some devotee's going to tell you something, it's a little off, you won't know it because you haven't read. Or you will say something, it's a little off, and you don't know. So that's kind of my experience with the books. Of course, we could say more, but I'll let you ask more.
It's interesting that it seems that at the time of initiation, we give vows to chant 16 rounds and follow the 4 regulative principles, but we don't vow for a specific time to read.
Oh, yeah, right.
And it seems that it seems at some point, like in your Sankirtan days, it was quite a common practice, and it was very well known. Do you feel it has got lost over time nowadays in our movement, or?
Well, Vaisheshika Prabhu always says, if you want to distribute books, you got to read them. So he's definitely preaching that. I think in the Brahmacharya ashram, amongst those who were not book distributors, book distribution was still, reading books was still quite prominent. And all of us as brahmacharis were always learning shlokas, like all the time. So I can't speak for the brahmacharya ashrams nowadays, but I would suspect we were probably a little more into it than maybe your average devotee now. Of course, Prabhupada was our spiritual master. It was natural. The books were coming out, so you do, 5th canto, part 1 is out, You would go into the boiler room and lock the door and just read the whole thing, not go on Sankirtan that day or something, So it was more exciting also. But I think there was definitely more of a flavor, more of a taste for that. There weren't a lot of other books. Now you have more books, so that you could read other books and maybe not get through all of Prabhupada's books as quickly as possible. But I can't say for sure if it's the influence of Kali Yuga or what it is, but it seems like in those days we were reading more. It seemed more part of the landscape of ISKCON. And I would just encourage devotees that if you're not reading sufficiently, you've got a spiritual vitamin deficiency. Like sometimes you look at your nails and there's little white spots, and the doctor says, well, you're deficient in something, So, there's indications of deficiencies, bad japa, not reading, etc., etc.
It's a powerful analogy, like a doctor who can see.
Yeah.
It's missing.
I mean, the opinion of the senior devotees in ISKCON is, where the reading of Prabhupada's books has lessened.
Yeah.
That's definitely and the opinion of the leaders is that's one of the biggest problems that we're facing now, is that it's less than it used to be.
And yeah, for sure, it's one reason why we conduct these kind of interviews. Also.
It's important.
Trying to inspire devotees.
It's important.
Would you like to share with us how do you experience Prabhupada's presence in his books?
Mm-hmm. Sometimes I experience it like a personal letter, and I think it's a nice way to read. I think you're going to ask that question. Maybe we're jumping ahead. Read it like it was a letter to you. That's one way.
For example, a purport, you just take it as a personal letter.
Just imagine this was a letter to me. Prabhupada's writing.
Powerful meditation, yeah.
Nobody's reading this. It's just me. It's just for me. There's a story Hare Krishnas Prabhu tells that Prabhupada was translating and he had his head like this, And I guess maybe Hare Krishnas was maybe walking up and down, and like a few minutes later, Prabhupada was still like that. So he said, Prabhupada, is everything okay? It looks like you're in pain or something. You've been in that position for, so many minutes. And Prabhupada said, trying to think of the right word. He said, I have to carefully choose this word. So when I read Prabhupada's books, I read them kind of a little bit like a detective, in the sense like, what is essentially Prabhupada trying to say here? What is the Siddhanta here? Especially because I teach, I'm kind of inclined naturally to do it that way, because I have to teach it, I have to understand it. But I've always done that because Prabhupada said, if you want to know me, read my books. It's like, so what does Prabhupada want us to understand? What does he want us to know? What is he telling us here? Because sometimes he says many things and we could get confused. And so, okay, he said this, but I read 3 purports before that. It seems different. So like always trying to understand really what's at the bottom of all of this? What's he really trying to tell us? What should I know? And also, this has come up later for me, later in life. I think when you're young, maybe you don't think like this as much as you do when you're later, after you've done so many things in your life, so many accomplishments. And then you look at yourself and say, well, I've done a lot of things, but as a person, I could do better working on myself a little bit more than I did when I was younger. So that naturally happens when you get older. So I think as I got older, when I would read Prabhupada's books, I would also ask the question, what does he want me to be? What am I supposed to be? Like if there was an ideal Prabhupada disciple, what does that disciple look like? Like, how is he in terms of his character, his interaction with devotees, his interaction with the public, his service mentality, all these things. So that I'm kind of like Sherlock Holmes looking, okay, what is the Siddhanta here? What is the message for me as an individual? Ideally, what does Prabhupada expect from me from this purport? Of course, every purport, it won't be one or the other necessarily. It may focus more on the Siddhanta, it may focus more on character. So that's kind of where I've gone. The third thing I've done, which has helped me, and this is just personal, it may or may not help anyone else. But what's helped me go deeper in Prabhupada's books was to ask questions, formulate a question, and then try to find the answer in Prabhupada's books. You know, it's like, okay, so it says this, but, you know, like these really difficult questions, like nobody can answer. I'm really good at asking questions that, you know, you ask 10 devotees, you'll get 10 different answers. And 3 of them will end with like, well, I'm not really sure, you know, like really difficult questions. But that has always stimulated me to go more deeply into Prabhupada's books and read everything he says about one topic. And I found that to be amazing. And what I found is that I realized that I didn't really understand the topic till I read everything he said on it. Because when you read everything, you hit a certain point in your hits where you're just hearing the same thing again. So you've gone through like 12, 15 different points. And you're like, okay. And now you start hearing the same thing. And as you hear it over and over again, okay, it's becoming more and more clear. This is what Prabhupada is saying. So I found that really, really helpful. And oftentimes I will come out of that kind of study, especially if it's for a course I'm giving, with one basic statement keeps coming up. I really didn't understand that topic. Now I think I really, you know, I didn't understand the depth of what Prabhupada was saying until I isolated everything. So either asking a question or taking a topic, that's always been helpful for me. But you were going to ask, did I kind of jump over to the next question?
That's fine. I mean, there's very, very valuable points you made, like detective mood of reading, trying to understand, and also formulating questions, like an active reading kind of.
Yeah. But sometimes I found it also interesting just to read the verses of a book you've already read the purports and you know well, and just like read Bhagavad Gita, like all the verses. Doesn't take that long. It's just interesting, or you know, get the story. That's sometimes you don't get the story because you get lost in the purport, and you know you only get like 3 verses a day or something, and you're reading. There's one other thing that I have not heard anyone talk about, and I learned this from someone who's not a devotee, but it's very interesting. I'll try to explain it. I don't know if I can communicate it in a few minutes, but sometimes I studied how to do seminars and learn things that would help people develop and learn how to coach. And sometimes they would teach something and I'd ask a question. I say, I don't understand this. And they would say, well, just read it and feel it and see what happens. Like they'd say, feel. Read it again and feel it. I thought, feel it? That's interesting. Although Prabhupada sometimes said, if you don't understand, just read it again. But they said, read it again, but feel it. And it's like, okay, you're going to feel it, which basically means you're not going to analyze it. You're going to, what's the emotional experience? Allow the emotion of what you're reading to enter without analyzing it. And I'm like the king of analysis. So it took me a while to learn how not to analyze. I mean, this is over years. It was kind of like I knew how not to analyze when they told me to feel. But if they told me that, 5 years earlier, I was like, what are you talking about? What's the point of reading it if you don't analyze it? So anyway, I read the story of Ambarish Maharaj and Durvasa Muni, and I said, okay, they said, feel it. I'll just feel the story. And the story opened up in ways that I'd never really saw before, just because I was just trying to feel, what's Ambarish feeling? What's Durvasa feeling? What's going on here? What's Krishna feeling? That was a whole new experience. So I just wanted to share that to everybody, that if you can try to do that and not just sometimes read something, it's not that you can't analyze it. You can analyze it all you want, but then read it and just feel it and see if something doesn't open up that you didn't really get when you were analyzing it. And that's what happened to me. Things came out of it. And I read the story many times. I probably had read it 10 times or whatever, or at least. And then I read it with feeling. And I was like, so Ambarish, Durvasa tried to kill Ambarish. And then he's waiting there a year for him to come and take breakfast, however that works. He comes back after a year, and Durvasa says, please forgive me. Ambarish says, for what? No problem. Oh, okay. Let's have breakfast. And so after I read this, I thought, could you serve breakfast to someone who just tried to kill you? I don't think so. But that never came to mind when I was in analytical mode. But when I was feeling it, I was like, all of a sudden, I could see that. Maybe it was obvious. Maybe it's just me. I missed it. But I could see that. Wait a minute. Ambarish is serving breakfast to someone who tried to kill him. That's unheard of. You know, Prabhu, I got an issue with you. You didn't smile at me today. All right. We can get over that. You know, he's not even reacting to being an attempt on his life. So I just wanted to share that. I think that's something that I would suggest everybody try.
That's very interesting. Yeah, basically you try to really understand what people feel in these stories and descriptions, and be part of that more on the emotional level. Okay.
Or what you're feeling also, like
yeah.
What they're feeling, I think, will come as a byproduct of what you're feeling. Will be a reflection. Yeah. What do you feel when you read this? Don't analyze it. Just what do you feel? Interesting.
In some ways,
you try it.
I will certainly try it. I'm just reading also Brihad Bhagavatamrita, so I will apply it there.
Yeah.
So in some way, it's also like about relishing, because sometimes we study something, we need to find something, prepare, but sometimes it's good to also just relish, just to read and absorb, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think some devotees have trouble with this word relish because it sounds like I'm enjoying Krishna. You know, it's like, am I supposed to enjoy? I'm not the enjoyer. I'm not supposed to enjoy anything. So like, you know, the whole idea of enjoying, you know, but everywhere in the Bhagavatam, it's always talking about nectar for the ear, karnamrita, you know, and there's always this word nectar and relishing and taste. Yeah, that is so important in Krishna consciousness. And in fact, like if you ever hang out with Dravida Prabhu, he has a word for this. He said, we are nectar hounds. We are searching for the nectar. You know, here's a verse. Here, you want some nectar? Here's a verse. So that is actually what devotees do. They churn the nectar. And it's such a simple principle, because that nectar is Baba Sodach, the medicine for birth and death. That will cure the disease of birth and death. It cures the disease, and it is giving us the taste. Raso varjam rasopiyasya. It's giving us taste. So when the symptom of an advanced devotee is they have a taste for chanting, they have a taste for hearing the Bhagavatam, that hearing becomes extremely important to them. They can't live without it. So yes, I would encourage devotees, you all should become nectar hounds. Extract nectar from Prabhupada's books as much as possible. Share that nectar, churn that nectar. The result will be, there'll be so many amazing results that you will be satisfied. And so many of your problems will be diminished or disappear when you're satisfied. Because really, all this hankering is coming because we're not spiritually, most of it is because we're not spiritually satisfied. So, yeah.
Yeah, hearing you talk, I feel the next question kind of not necessary to ask is like how to overcome obstacles in reading. You know, someone feels tired, has no taste.
Well, actually, I do have a remedy for that.
You already gave a lot of good reasons for reading.
Yeah, but something practical can help. So I established a recording studio. It's actually in that door behind me. Mm-hmm. And this was probably like, well, we've been in this house, I think 16 years or something like that, or 17 years. And so it's been there, but it hasn't been used a lot because finding time has always been difficult because of my other services. And so I was reading a magazine on recording, and I guess it's a problem for many people who have studios in their home, who have full-time jobs and families, because when do you find time? So he said, you should make an appointment with yourself. Like I was working with Havi Prabhu, we're working on a new version of Brahma Samhita. And so we would set a time. And it was a time that was good for both of us. And so he would come and I'd always be ready. And we worked together. And, we worked probably like 40 hours over a few months. And I would have never found that 40 hours, except that he, was coming and his time is valuable and I had to be ready. So in this article, it said, make an appointment with yourself to go in your recording studio. And I thought, that's really interesting. Make an appointment with yourself. Like put in your schedule. I'm going to go in the studio this time. So make an appointment with yourself to read. So what I found is if you just make the appointment and you're disciplined enough to keep it and keep those eyelids open for that period of time and make sure you're not tired at that time. And even if you don't want to read, you just like, well, I've committed. This is my sadhana. It becomes much easier than if it's I'll try to fit it in or try to find time. So I've done a lot of that early in the morning because I found that was, for me, was the easiest. So I had to adapt a little bit. So I didn't chant all my rounds in the morning, which is not ideal. But I always finish my rounds. But if I compromise my reading and try to find a time, I don't always get it. So I always found like after Mangal Arti, I'd chant half my rounds. Then I could read. And then in the evening, afternoon, evening, I need to walk. I need to move. I'm sitting around. So it's like, okay, get out and walk, So it was kind of good. You have 8 rounds, go somewhere. We have forests everywhere around here. I'll just choose I got like 5 different forests I can go to. Choose your forest for today. And so that worked for me. I've talked to other devotees who said the same thing. That has worked for them, busy devotees. So you have to find your time where you're awake and just make that your appointment with yourself to read. That's when I'm going to do it. That's, I think, the easiest that I've found. It's kind of infallible in that sense, as long as you're up at that time and you just commit to it. This is my time. I have an appointment with Prabhupada's books. I'll just do it.
Yeah, you make it.
Or join a group of devotees who are reading. That's the other one. I won't do it on my own. But that's okay. We'll find a bunch of devotees. Set a time that's good for all of you.
Yeah, make it a priority, and like everything else, you kind of
exactly. I think also, what's an impetus to read is to hear devotees, especially younger devotees, who are well versed, giving class. I remember one time Hare Krishnas, at the time he was a sannyasi, Maharaj gave class, and he was quoting shlokas left and right. And I was thinking, after the class, I need to study more. He knows so many shlokas. I don't know all the shlokas he quoted. I'm deficient. I felt deficient. Like I have to utilize my time. So, someone asks you a question in class, you don't know the answer. Well, like, how many years are you not going to know the answer? You need to be studying more. So sometimes hearing a person who's very learned, oh, he knows a lot. He's reading. He's disciplined. I need to be like that. That can be an inspiration.
About practical application, just before we wind up.
Yeah.
You're well known for someone who really stresses application. I mean, I found that statement of yours, the mission statement. My mission is to give devotees the best weapon available to fight their war with Maya, and the training required to expertly use those weapons and strategies needed to win the war. So it's a nice meditation, and then also we look at your seminars. It's all about transformation through forgiveness, power of humility, japa. Yeah. Also, your book is the latest book is Living the Wisdom of Bhakti.
Yeah. That's exactly what that book was about. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would be very curious on one hand, hear what is your personal journey that brought you to this point? Why do you felt it so important to focus on this? And then maybe you can give some example how can apply the wisdom of Prabhupada's books in our daily life.
It was actually hard to say what made a transition, but I can think of one thing that happened along the way. It probably happened earlier, but this is more recent, maybe 15 years ago. I did a training on how to teach seminars, workshops. These are like, how to teach like a 5-day workshop that goes like 12 hours a day and keep people on the edge of their seat. And the person who taught it is maybe the second most popular person in North America, just under Tony Robbins, who's the top. So he was teaching us how to do this. And one of the things that he said is like, you have to open people's minds up. Like Prabhupada said, theoretically accept the Gita, even if you don't accept it, at least theoretically. So the way he does it is he said, the worst thing, he's talking to the audience now. He's showing us how he does this. And you can all use this if you find it useful. He said, the 3 worst words for learning is, I know that. And he said, you may know it, but if you don't live it, you don't actually know it. Like, for example, let's say someone's giving a class on how to make $1 million. You say, yeah, I've been to those classes. I know all that. Are you a millionaire? No. Then he would say, well, if you're not, you don't know it. So he went on to explain. He said, you've heard of it. You know about it. You have the information, but unless you're living it, you can't really say that you know it. So that struck a chord because we see this in our own lives and the lives of other devotees. And it became kind of a journey in taking the teachings of Prabhupada and translating them into action in more of a systematic step-by-step way. Because as I was learning how to facilitate seminars and studying other people who do this, that's what they do. They take philosophy, a principle, and they start dissecting it into little steps of practice. Both so you can reflect and see, do I actually understand this? I can calibrate, well, am I actually chanting properly? By what standard? Let's look at some standards. Let's evaluate. And what would be steps? What would be things and attitudes and practices I could do to improve? So that became my whole focus on teaching for the last 15 years since seeing that's how so many other people taught that way. And I thought, well, in ISKCON, we're very philosophical and philosophy is important. It sharpens the intellect. But I started thinking, I want to make sure whoever comes to my seminar is doing what I teach. I'm not going to leave it up to them. I'm going to do whatever has to be done. We're going to do it in the workshop. So, and if it's something they have to do outside the workshop, I would say, so how are you going to do it? What are going to be the obstacles? How are you going to overcome those obstacles? Are you going to need help? What if you give in? What are you going to do then? Like practical. So then I had another realization, which was interesting. And I think maybe we all understand this. Prior to this time, because I like to think, and anyone who knows me, they know, I can talk forever, and Krishna just gives me lots of realizations. This is how I'm composed of, he just sends me lots of realizations, So I'm with my friends, and they're like, what's your realization? They'll ask me, what's your realization? Because they know I'm always percolating, thinking, percolating, My wife doesn't like it so much. I'm thinking too much. Hello over there. What universe are you in? Oh, I'm in the 10th canto now. That's my life, And so through trying to be more introspective and trying to be more practical in application of philosophy, I came to this point of disjunction where I started to understand that intellectual realization is sometimes very difficult to distinguish from practical realization. Because if I intellectually realize it, I think I've realized it. I finally understood humility. Humility means this and that. And I've studied humility. I've given many classes and workshops about it, like intellectually, I think I got it down, but it has nothing to do with me being humble. But it's hard to distinguish that, because I think because I've understood it, then it must be affecting me. So I realize there are two different things. And I think we get caught up in this. We have the intellect, and in Vedic system of learning, that intellectualization is only one stage. It's more like the assimilation stage. You hear it, you assimilate it, and the third stage is you put it into practice. You have to assimilate it before you can put it into practice. So it's subtle. There's a subtle difference, and sometimes we think we are something we're not. And in psychology, they call it cognitive dissonance. You think you're doing something, but you're not, because you have a conception of yourself that you are, and you can't even see you're not doing it. It's very strange. But I think maybe we all have this experience, like, we're devotees, so devotees are good, and therefore, if you're a devotee, everything you do is good. Even if it's not good, you don't notice it's not good. Did you just steal the flowers? Yeah, that's not good. No, it is. It's Krishna, for Krishna. You kind of lose scope, So that was my realization about practice. So I think it's always a good question after you read something. It's like, what does this actually mean in my life right now for who I am? And when you do that, you start to realize all the ways in which you didn't apply things that Prabhupada said, or you misapplied or misunderstood. And once you start looking at yourself, saying, am I actually acting like a devotee according to what Prabhupada taught? You start to realize, in many ways, not. Why did I get angry at that devotee? This devotee bothers me. I don't want to talk to him. I'm angry. Okay. Do I understand this verse of the Gita where I should control anger? Yeah, I understand what it means. Yeah, I can chant the verse. I know the Sanskrit. I know the word meanings. Great. And you got angry. Okay. So, that was the kind of, that's what I went through in my own life. And so I became much more self-aware, and I was catching myself a lot. Oh, look at you, just got upset. Now you're intolerant, right? You just said that. Only a proud person would have said that to that person. How could you have said that? But I think, no, I'm a good devotee. I'm humble. I'm a Prabhupada disciple. I think all these things, and I don't notice that I'm doing the opposite, because I think a Prabhupada disciple wouldn't do that. A senior devotee wouldn't do that. Someone who knows that verse would do that. Well, you just did it. So that was my realization.
So would you say that before we actually can apply, first there is a step in between where we become more introspective, where we actually catch ourselves doing things? And
I would say
from there,
exactly.
Yeah. From there, we can start to learn to change ourselves. Right? But without that introspection, it will be very difficult.
Yeah, if you don't want to learn something. Yeah, I think the biggest problem is we think we already know it. Or, the other problem is we have assumptions. We already have assumptions, and then we just read Prabhupada's books to validate assumptions, about ourselves or others. And then the assumptions may be wrong. Rather than go into the books neutral, rather than read the books to validate your assumptions. That's like what scientists do, that we're so upset about them, isn't it? So, it requires introspection for sure, to really be able to, to admit that I didn't understand it, to admit I did something wrong. That's hard. False ego doesn't like that. False ego revolts. The big one for me, because I'm married, is that when you're married, maybe it's true also for brahmacharis, but maybe less so. But when you're married, it's like, I ask devotees, if I had a video camera on your life, let's say for the last month, we're in a workshop, let's say 100 devotees. Say, if I had a video of your life, would you be okay if I showed that on the screen right now? And they're all like, no, don't show it. I'm like, why not? You're a devotee, And so it's like we teach this principle, integrity, how you are outside, you are inside, and inside your house, it's all one. That's integrity, integral. And so that shouldn't be there. There shouldn't be like, if I don't want you to see how I treat my wife and kids, or I don't want you to see me at work, how I treat my employees. Like, why? Why do you treat them differently than what Krishna is instructing you, than what Prabhupada wants you? So I always tell devotees, your sadhana begins at 9 o'clock in the morning. That's the real sadhana, because now you're going to have to practice everything you learned. You're going to, all in your interactions with people, as all the bad stuff or the good stuff comes out. So, it's a different way of thinking. So I think that's important, important mantra. Sadhana actually begins at 9. Real life begins at 9. Before 9, it's easy. It's just chanting with devotees, You're not even interacting with anybody, basically. Then you go after 9, you interact, and all the bad stuff can come out. Or the good stuff. Anyway.
Thank you so much. There's a lot of food for thought that you share with us. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Do you have any last words? Any final?
Yeah, I would just say probably the worst thing a devotee could do is not study Prabhupada's books, not read them regularly. You could say, well, was that worse than not chanting? Well, if you study the Shastra, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says every Shastra, the essence of every Shastra is teaching you to chant purely. So how are you going to chant purely if you're not studying the Shastras that are going to help you chant purely? Like most of the offenses, I think only one offense is made while chanting. The rest are made while we're not chanting. So having Prabhupada's books is essential. And it's just, I would say it's violence to yourself to avoid them. It's kind of like self-hatred. And I know some devotees say they're academic, or Prabhupada repeats himself, or this or that. But there's always something there for you, something deeper, something you need to be reminded of, something you didn't understand, something that will pop off the page. That the same purport you read 10 times, and the 11th time it pops off the page, and it's like an oh my God experience. I never realized what Prabhupada was saying. So, and the other thing is just to be connected to Prabhupada, even if you've heard it, it's just you're reminded, this is what Prabhupada is teaching. The last thing I want to say is I had a really wonderful experience. I was asked to give class on Nectar of Instruction, second verse. Long, super long purport. And after I read the purport, it was an aha moment, if I ever had one. And I, of course, I've read this purport many times, but haven't read it in, I don't know, maybe 4 years or something. The whole mission of Krishna consciousness, the whole philosophy in a nutshell that Prabhupada came to explain is in that purport. Don't work like an ass, live simply, grow your own food. It's all in that purport in relation to accumulation. Don't be involved in political talks, gossiping. He talks about political talks. And are we talking politically during COVID? Probably too much. And I was amazed, because Prabhupada wanted these books, which we thought were for us, distributed to the public. Because we asked him, is this for us, or no, for the public? And that his whole mission was in that purport to the second verse. And of course, we all understand everything in that purport. He said it. It's plain. We've heard it. But just to hear it again is like, it was a reminder. This is Prabhupada's mission. If you want a mission statement, you just read that purport. That's the mission statement. So I find that, just if I don't read Prabhupada's books enough, I feel like I'm drifting off. You know, I read so many books, but I feel like I'll drift off a little bit. And it's sometimes you read other books and you'll read something. Is that really what Prabhupada says? Sometimes you're not sure. You go back to Prabhupada's books, read it, stay on course. This is where everything has to go through Prabhupada's Siddhanta. So that's my personal experience. So that's what I would say to everyone.
Beautiful to be in that association of Prabhupada through his books, always again. So yeah, thank you so much, Mahatma Prabhu, for all this.
My pleasure.
Realization was really, it was a great pleasure and honor to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai, Hare Krishna.
Go Premanandi. Hari Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.